Hi, and thank you for being here today. My name is Amy Bryant of Wild Child Counseling here in Atlanta, Georgia, and Parenting Beyond Punishment, an online community. And I am here today with John Payne. Um, as parents, I know a lot of us dream about living a simpler, less chaotic lives for ourselves and our families. Um, one where we're not rushing to school and rushing to work and rushing through dinner to get to soccer or music or whatever else might be going on. And I can speak for myself to say sometimes I don't know what that might look like or how I might be able to get there. And some parents might be afraid that they're missing out or that their child is missing out because they're not doing these things, or maybe it somehow will hold them back from being successful in life. And so today I've invited John Payne, author of Simplicity Parenting and The Soul of Discipline, to come and talk. And he's going to address both our dreams about what this might look like and also our worries, and then also provide some practical ways we might be able to begin to simplify starting today. Welcome, Kim. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you, Amy.
It's so lovely. You have influenced my parenting from the very beginning, probably even before my daughter started to walk. And so I'm really grateful from what I've learned from you and your books and even some of your online trainings. They're just so lovely and, really help us give confidence to this idea that we can live differently than how maybe society expects us to live. And it's such a lovely idea. Um, and I'm just really glad that I can invite other people to come and listen to you today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could just start by talking about some of the myths or some of the worries that might prevent parents from choosing a simpler life.
Yeah, that's a good way to start. Some of the myths are, perhaps one of the biggest ones is that if we don't enroll our child in all that's going on, if we don't engage them in this fast track life that we seem to be expected to lead now, somehow that's going to actually disadvantage them. And that's probably one of the biggest myths, because one of the things that we know is our children are moving into a very deconstructed world. If we've got a 10-year-old right now, by the time they're through college and out into the workforce, over 60% of all employment is going to be self-employed. In other words, we're moving into a time where kids have to be creative, innovative, adaptable, and they have to have grit and problem-solving capacities. And kids need time to do that. They don't need a lot of external structure. They need time to be able to meet their own problems, time to be able to solve them, time to be able to learn to be creative and not be passively entertained and overscheduled. And so by descheduling our children, by giving them downtime, decompression time, that enables them to build the capacities that are coming in the future. Often it's said, oh, simplicity and balance in family life. That was so lovely back in the 50s. Actually, it might have been lovely in the 50s, but it's crucial right now if we look towards the future.
Isn't that interesting? Because I think a lot of us think that kids have to learn how to take instruction, right? So we're going to put them in group sports. The pressure is to put them in activities at BOR and ballet and group sports and music lessons, where there is a lot of structure and a lot of following the rules. But what I'm hearing is that what kids need is time away from the rules to really kind of, well, like you said, to have grit, to figure things out, to problem solve in ways that an adult isn't telling them. And that's how they develop those skills.
Particularly, I think we need to be careful about developmental stages, because when children are little, right up until about sort of 5, 6, 7, that's a stage where like I think of it as a family norming process, where the kind of the way in which a child understands who they are and their place in the world is actually through fairly close to home. actually.
right,
When they start school, particularly in the middle school, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, that then shifts gear, and now it's home life, which is the big foundation. And then there's the school life, and on top of that. And that's a time where they can start doing a little more of that, but not so much. At least I'm a big fan of having at least 3 afternoons a week at home during the school week. And then later in the teen years, it was like building blocks. In the teen
yeah,
years, that's when they need a lot of structure. A lot. That's when the sports, when the activities, when that kind of, just when they are undergoing their biggest emotional changes, um, very mercurial, really kind of moving all that. That's when that particular thing you mentioned just now, Amy, that's when that's particularly important, of structure, of rules, of a kind of the structure that sports activities and such can give. I don't mean that little children shouldn't have structure. They
right,
absolutely should.
right,
But in my book that you mentioned, The Soul of Discipline, I talk about we move from the governor in the early years,
yeah,
where we're governor of the family state, to then the gardener in their elementary years, where we're listening in like a gardener does to the earth, but then we make a decision like a farmer or a gardener does.
yeah,
And then in the teenage years, we move to the guide, where we're really, sort of moving in beside our kids and helping guide them. So it's not that they don't need the structure, but in the Soul of Discipline book, what I talk about is what structure at what time.
yeah,
Because as a society, we seem to have got it upside down. We parent little kids like they're teenagers, and then when they're out of control as teenagers, we try and bring it back in really sharply and hard, which is probably what would have been best to have done to keep them close like that when they were little. And a lot of what simplicity parenting does and the solar discipline approach does is actually simply just put it at the sensible developmental stages. It's not particularly radical in that sense at all.
right, right. It is, though, about having developmentally appropriate expectations, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
at this stage, this is what children need because of what their brain is doing. And then how that changes in these shifts. I like how you break it down, sort of that 6, 7, 8, they need that foundation of family. And then 9 through 12, the school life sits on that foundation of family. And then the teen years, um, it's the structure of sports and activities that on top of the school and the family that then help support that hugely, what do they call it? It's when they're the pruning, right? That's going
Mm-hmm.
on in their brain in those years. That's
Yep.
can be quite emotionally intense.
Well, I remember some of the most crucial decisions that I made when I was growing up, as a teenager, about whether to take part in some, like highly risk-taking activity that a lot of my friends were involved in. The voice inside me that actually guided me and held me back from getting involved in stuff that would have been, really unhelpful, illegal, just not okay. Well, actually, the voice of my mom and my dad, in particular, that my teachers at school, they actually gave me the structure that I needed to not go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to have we seem to need to reclaim that space
Mm-hmm.
of when our children are little, that they really do need us to be the governors. They really do need us to be in charge. We really do need to set loving limits, to have them be strong.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't need is outsourcing of a lot of, like at 4 years old, outsourcing all, so many activities, just too much, too sexy, too young. It's flooding our kids, and they go. I've seen a lot of kids just really come back to being who they truly are when we can just dial life back a little bit. A lot of the behavioral problems slow down. A lot of these sibling issues slow down, and the school friends at school increase, but the academic learning increases because they're not in what Daniel Goldman calls the fight or flight response
Right.
of amygdala hijack.
Mm-hmm.
Their brains that you mentioned, Amy, are free to now move more into their creative and executive and empathetic centers, and they're not just trying to survive a life
Right.
that is moving too fast.
Right. Right. I think it's so true. And in that governor state too, it's remembering that our role is to make sure that they're safe. And that's why our discipline practices in those times are so important. You know, that they feel safe and connected, that we're finding tools to work with them in such a way that isn't scaring them or hurting them,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
such a part of that foundation.
Yeah, to be able to give those kind of loving limits when children are little, and to know that those limits will slowly increase as they get older.
Right.
But, honestly, sometimes when they're older, and it's not going so well, we can just pull them back in again.
Yeah.
That's why I give these almost like three concentric circles of governor, gardener, guide. But I've got a 16 and an 18-year-old, kids. And sometimes, honestly, I need to say to them, come on back to the governor. Hello, governor,
Yes.
and just for a brief while, because that kind of, they're not doing so well in the larger space. And it offers a sort of a very simple way of pulling it back into a space that's not punitive in any way. It's just giving them the space that they can handle. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the difference between having it be punitive or having it be loving.
Yeah.
And knowing that that's really what they can handle right now, and they're simply not going to be able to handle a bigger space.
Right. I have had that same experience with my daughter, who's 9 now. She, you can tell when life has gotten too big for her. I love the concentric circles. And then as soon as I bring her back in a little closer, like, we're actually gonna go for a walk, just the two of us today, or, I just make things, she has less choice. um, Almost like choices dysregulate her sometimes. And
Hmm.
she just needs me to say, this is what we're doing. And then you can just see her calm right back down. It might be
Hmm.
a couple of days or a couple of weeks, a couple of months. But yeah, sometimes bringing those limits closer really does make a difference in a
Well,
gentle and
yeah.
loving way.
Yeah, it goes. I think what happens is it goes from when a child's little right up until they're sort of 6, 7 years old. It goes from what I call you may choices.
Hmm.
That's the choice of the governor. The governor says, you may choose between these three cereals.
Yeah,
You may choose.
yeah.
And in a sense, you're giving limited choices. So there's you may choices. When kids are in their tween years, a little older, it's then tell me about what your plan is. Tell me about the choices you want, and then I'll make the decision.
Hmm.
And then later, in the teen years, it's got to do with let's decide. So we move from you may, when the kids are really young, to when a teenager is 16, 17, 18, like my kids are, it's let's decide.
Hmm.
We'll decide together.
Right.
It's your voice is really, really valued in that. And now it's not that the voice is not valued when they're little. It's just that children before the age of 12 and neurologically don't understand social and emotional cause and effect.
Hmm.
And yet, so often we'll be tempted to say to a 4-year-old, 5, 6-year-old, now, how do you think that made your sister feel? And
Right.
she'll look at you and just say, bad? I don't know. And you think, am I raising a sociopath? Like, you should understand that
Hmm.
that's true, that you
Yeah.
just said some unkind words. And we as a society are expecting much too high a level of emotional and social awareness and understanding of cause and effect. You know, when a child's very little, 4 or 5 years old, we need to be able to simply say to them, that really did make your sister feel very uncomfortable. That hurt her feelings. She's
Hmm.
crying right now. And that those were harsh words.
Hmm.
And let's try and find a way to help now.
Right.
But we've turned this thing inside out, and it makes interesting, Amy. What I've seen is it makes when we talk to kids over their heads, expecting more than they can understand, actually it stresses them. And
Mm-hmm.
with all this emphasis on safety we have in society today, I
Yes.
actually think it fundamentally has kids feeling unsafe
Mm-hmm.
when we do that.
Yes, I totally agree that I have to keep you safe. We can't do this. It's not safe. I think we hear it a lot. Um, I remember asking my daughter, I wonder how that made her feel. And it made her mad. And she would
Yep.
say, she would dig in. That's sort of her, I'm not going to be shamed, even though, of course, I would never intentionally shame her, but I think she took it that way. And she was
Hmm.
like, she feels fine, you know, like she
Yep.
wasn't going to have it. And I was like, oh, this phrase isn't the right approach for her. You know, she's a very good teacher.
Yeah, it's not to say we can't move in when a situation
Of
happens
course.
amongst siblings or the playground, of course, but
Yeah.
it's much more oh, I think we need to see how, how Miguel, how we can make Miguel feel better again,
Yeah.
because not being allowed to climb up the slide, I'm thinking of younger children,
Yeah.
um, is that's made him very sad. Let's.
Yes.
It's just when your child has said, "No, I'm the king, and you can't climb up,"
Yes.
and you're thinking, "Oh my goodness, how did I raise this child?"
It's just
Yeah.
a part of their learning, you
Hmm.
know. They want to be on top. For my daughter, it was always like, oh, it sounds like you wanted to be on top, and I see they're crying. And then
Hmm.
let's check in with them. And
Hmm.
that she was like all about, great, let's figure this out.
Yeah, let's figure it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
but to a 14 or 15-year-old, it's absolutely, you could say to a child, and one does all the time, we really have to consider how that
Yes.
how that came across. You said something, but it came across like this. Do you
Right.
understand that? Because wow, that was harsh.
Mm.
And that's perfectly fine to say to a 12,
Right.
13, 14-year-old. But as a society, we seem to have turned this thing inside out, and it really stresses our children because they don't know what we're talking about. Sorry, and yet we're looking at them like they should know. We're
Mm.
looking right at them like you should know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about here, and they can only dimly grasp it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it probably alarms their system a little bit. Mom wants
Hmm.
me to know this, and I don't have no idea what she's talking
Yep.
about,
Yep. And then they
or
get
have
mad.
some small inkling. Yeah.
Yeah, and for a lot of kids, it's better to be bad than dumb,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So they feel
Right.
dumb, so they'll be bad.
Right. Right. Or whatever they might perceive that bad to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We have a question. Leland asked, does a 10-year-old have the mental development to walk them through let's decide rather than tell me what you want? And then she says, can we help a 10-year-old learn to problem solve or find their own solutions? Or is it just better to see what they think of and expand on that? Like to collaboratively problem solve with them.
I mean, there's about five different layers to that question, right?
Probably, yes.
It's a great question. Um, Essentially, I think once kids hit 9, your daughter's age, Amy, it's a cuspian age, 9, 10. Jung described it as a time of orphan fantasy when kids they start to even worry, are you really my mum? Are you really my dad? And um, it's a lot comes up. They're not big kids yet, but they're not little kids anymore. And I find the key to working with kids this age is to shift gear. It's really important to not treat them like little kids anymore. Just tell
Yeah.
them what's going to happen all the time. But I find the key to this is to, and my kids have heard this a lot over the years, is to ask them what's your plan. Tell me
Yeah.
what you want to do. Tell me why that happened. What is it that you want to do? Tell me your plan. And then to say to them, there's three caveats, and they're really organic, simple caveats. One is tell me your plan, but tell me respectfully. Don't don't be fresh and disrespectful and expect me to say yes, because And at 9, 10, um, one can look right at a kid and say, because that's not the way the world works. It
Right.
is just not the way the world works, sweetheart. It's not me being the meanest parent in the world. It's just not the way the world. You can't demand stuff and then expect people to say yes.
Right.
Not the way the world works, which is a really important thing in terms of social education. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me your plan, tell me respectfully, tell me your plan and tell me at the right time. You know,
Right.
don't be asking for play dates in the school parking lot for the next 3 nights. You know, my
Yeah.
kids have learned that if they want a now answer, which is NOW, they may have it, but it's minus the W.
I have
Right?
used that exact phrase with my daughter. If you need an answer now, the answer is no. But if you can wait, then the answer is maybe.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. And the longer you wait, the more chance it has of being a yes.
yeah.
And that's teaching kids impulse control.
Hmm.
It just is, but drip feeding, just little
Yeah.
bits. It might seem, well, that's not teaching kids impulse control. It truly is, but
Yeah.
on a micro drip feeding
Right.
level.
In a
And
way
then,
they can handle, you
mm-hmm,
know.
mm-hmm, they can get it. They can totally get it. Because some of the worst parenting decisions one can make are the on the fly ones. You know,
Yes.
you live to regret those ones.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
Yes.
And then the third thing is, well, so third thing is tell me your plans and tell me with consideration. And this is a biggie for a 10-year-old, the consideration, because now they're coming up to the stage 10, 11, 12, 13, where they're able at 10 just beginning to be able to understand social cause and effect. They're not quite there yet, but you can begin to coach them up to it and to be able to say, look, when you tell me your plan, um, tell me your plan so that you take your brother's schedule into account. Tell me your plan so that you are aware that that play date you want to have involves me driving you right across town and all the other
Right.
things that have to happen and us getting to your little sister's checkup at the doctor or whatever it is.
Right.
But just lay the day out for a child and say, now take that, this is for a 10-year-old, take that into consideration. And if you show me that you're figuring out what you want to do and being a team player, because we're a family team. You know, I'm the coach, and actually the franchise owner, but but your plan is important. So tell me respectfully, considerately, with consideration, and tell me at the right time. And if you can do, and you can, if we coach our kids up to do this, it's they get it and they get it
Yeah.
quickly, and then it's not treating them like little kids, because after they tell you their plan, then you know, we'll make the decision. We relieve a 10-year-old of having to make decisions like that. They're not
Hmm.
ready for it,
Hmm.
but it means we're listening, and it means they know that we know they're growing up, and but we're not treating them like teenagers yet.
Hmm. Right. So they help with the plan, but they don't have to make it all come together because
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of
Yeah.
higher thinking going on.
And
I
again, that makes kids feel unsafe. We're back to the unsafe thing.
Yes, back to the unsafety. This is too
Mm-hmm.
much for me. My alarm system is getting aroused. I In our family we talked a lot about we're a team, we're going to work together. Um, but none of that really makes sense to young children, I feel like, until they get to a certain age. So I laid the groundwork with the words, but meanwhile, when my daughter was 3 or 4, she'd be like, yeah, but I don't want to do that, even if we are a family, you know. But I've
Right.
noticed suddenly around age 9, it kind of started a little bit at 8, but all of a sudden she was like, oh, I get it. You know, like you could
Mm-hmm.
see her brain, her thinking about, okay, so if I want this to happen, mom can't be in the middle of a work project or cooking dinner, and she can't be stressed out or in the middle of a nap, you know. Um, and you know, it's just so interesting that you can see the timing of when they're ready, when
Mm-hmm.
we know it's okay. That it, I think it's really like knowing it's okay that they're not quite able to do these things sooner. right?
Yeah, yeah, and
They
it's
really,
yeah, and when she's older, it'll be a case of saying to her, um, and she's 16, 17, saying to her if something goes wrong, or she wants to do something, the guide, now that not the governor, not the gardener, but the guide will say, sweetheart, well, is that a direction or a distraction? Is that
yes.
is that taking you where you want to go? Because teenagers they're great, but they can be spectacularly disinterested in our opinions.
Yes.
But they're very, very interested in their direction, in
Yeah,
where they want to go. And so talking to them about, is that a direction or is that a distraction? Is that a crosstown bus when you want to go downtown?
mm,
That's for me some of the most fruitful conversations I've had with teenagers are about it. Then one's not into punishment, one's not into being heavy-handed. You're just saying, wow, those, that party and that sleepover and then getting up early and getting to soccer practice and now you're not feeling so well and you're coming down with something, you know, what's the learning from this? Because
yeah.
that seemed like a ton of distraction right when you're about to sit your SATs, you
Oh,
know?
yeah. Yeah.
That like was that a distraction? Was that a direction? There but to ask a 4-year-old that is just
Or
plain weird.
no, or a 9-year-old. I
Or a
could see
9-year-old.
that my 9-year-old would be like, of course it's direction. It's exactly
Mhm.
the direction I want to go right now, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
sometimes I just want to go that direction with her, even though it's totally a distraction. So um, it's okay for us to totally get it on that level with them too.
Hmm.
And then go, okay, wait, we've got to back up a minute.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so let's shift gears for just a minute and not totally, but what are some of the benefits? I mean, we did sort of talk about the benefits of simplifying our lives.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, the benefits that I find the primary benefit really is that of deep family connection. It's
yeah,
it's not that I'm against all these activities, against having hundreds of toys, against having all these activities, against screens, television, computers. I'm not against all that stuff, but I'm passionately for deep family connection, that
yeah,
that foundation from which our kids will go out into the world and then come back, and then out a little further and then come back.
yeah,
That's the essential outcome of living a simple, balanced, but connected life. Because Amy, as you know, we have almost 1,000 simplicity parenting coaches around the
yeah.
world. We have this simple little coaching course. Well, it would be ironic if it was complicated, right?
It would
But
be.
and we have almost 1,000 coaches around the
Wow.
world who have these little groups, 5, 10, 15, 20 people, like this evening, all around the world, there'll be parents gathering with a group leader, a parent coach, looking at how to lead a simple and balanced life.
Wow.
It's a thrilling worldwide grassroots movement.
Movements.
And if anyone wants to take that training, it's very basic, it's very straightforward. They just
Yeah.
let us know. But the we get a lot of the reason I mention this is we get a lot of feedback from all cross culturally all around the world. We get a ton of feedback from parents saying that when we simplified and balanced, when we got rid of the distractions, when we got rid of the overscheduling, when we dialed back screens and phones and computers, and we had some digital Sabbath in our family,
Yes.
when we dialed back toys and books, we just not get rid of this stuff, but just ask what's really essential and what's just simply not essential here.
Hmm.
So we dialed that back, but what emerged was just a joy of being together.
Yeah.
And I would at the end in this is that And when problems come up, as they always do, with kids, when the problems come up, it's more malleable. We're more. It's softer. You can fix it quicker.
Yeah.
Um, there's not that fiery pushback that can become habitual when kids are disoriented. Because as you know, Amy, I simply don't believe in willful disobedience. I've never met a willfully disobedient kid in my life. I've only
Right.
ever met a disoriented one. Kids are disoriented, and what disorients them big time is when too much stuff is going on and they don't get enough time to decompress, just to
Yeah.
dream, to be, to work on projects, just to, in a sense, have that space to slowly, gently come to know who they are, as opposed to getting pounded, particularly with screens and marketing messages, which tell them how they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's confusing because there's many competing images of how they should be, as opposed to giving them time away from screens, away from activities, to come to know who they actually are. It's the difference between the magnetic north of toxic pop culture and the true north of a child's emerging self.
Yes. Yes. I think it can be so hard to think about how a core of family time can feel good because we generically are used to having a hard time together. But I think that so much of that is because we're so rushed. We don't spend that time really cultivating and nurturing our time together.
Mm-hmm.
And it can feel a little intimidating, I think, sometimes. What the heck are we going to do if we're not on our screens or running someplace in the car, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just
Um,
and it takes a little bit of courage to just be, because and you alluded to
yes.
this more recently, is that recently in our conversation, is that the when you look around and there's so many people living this frenetic pace of life, we often think, oh, well, that's just the way it is these days. I
Yeah.
mean, all little kids have iPads. All little kids take, master classes in this and that, and do this and that. And this is just the way it is these days. And actually, I asked my friend who's an evolutionary neurologist who studies the sort of the slow development over the brain over tens of thousands of years. And I said to her, if how are we doing with kids' stress these days? Wouldn't the brain, the key to this conversation was, wouldn't the brain adapt? We're told kids are resilient, kids are adaptable. So aren't they just adapting to this? Aren't they adapting to all the stuff we're throwing at them? And she said, probably, probably. I'll run I'll run some numbers. She was semi-retired, so she really threw herself into a project for a couple of weeks. And she came back saying, yeah, our children will adapt. Most likely they will. And I said, good. And she said, but do you want the bad news? I said, no. And she said,
No,
no, really,
please.
what's the bad news? And she said, well, if life didn't get any more stressful than it is today for an average 12-year-old, she took 12 as her target age, the average 12-year-old would be fine with this level of stress in about 900 to 1200
Oh my
years.
gosh. Right.
So we've gotten hundreds of years ahead of our kids' ability to adapt. So what happens is that the ancient brain, the reptilian brain, the amygdala, the survival brain, jumps up and becomes the false king. It's like the lizard king. The brain, that part of the brain is shaped like a lizard, puts a crown on and says, I'm in charge. And not the beautiful empathetic brain, the creative brain, the cooperative brain. When we've gotten hundreds and hundreds of years ahead of our kids' ability to adapt to all this stuff that's coming at them, the body, the neural psychology of this is a very simple answer. The fight, flight, freeze, and flop brain says, I'm in charge. And that means everything becomes hard in a family, everything becomes a fight.
Yes. And we see this more and more with more anxiety in children, very young children, more depression in very young children. Um,
Yeah.
I know in my office, sometimes we just spend time being together because they're so uncomfortable and they need me to be present with them just to
Hmm.
help them learn to be comfortable together again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And we can do that. In the Simplicity Parenting book, I give this image. You might remember, Amy, I talk about my earlier biography where I worked in refugee camps in the Vietnam War. I worked in the Thai Cambodian refugee camps, and I've worked in a number of war-torn areas, and I've seen very stressed children. My work in those camps were mainly, almost entirely, with children and families. And I saw very, very stressed children, of course.
yeah,
But imagine my surprise when I came back to the West after a good long time working in these kind of environments around the world, and I saw the same look on kids' face. They were nervous, they were jumpy, they were hypervigilant, they were over controlling. All the things that I saw in the refugee camps in Cambodia, I was seeing in Europe and in the US. Only these kids, they didn't come from war. They were came from cross cultural backgrounds, cross economic backgrounds. They were just regular kids, and I came to think of it as the undeclared war on childhood,
yeah,
and which is a very grim image. It's a
yeah,
dour, dark, hard image, but the hopeful part is that we can declare peace in our homes. We can. There's so little we can do about war in various places around the world, but we can declare peace in our homes in the undeclared war on childhood. And the way to declare peace is to simplify, balance, and give childhood the space and the grace that many of us were given in our childhood, and to pay that forward and give it to our own kids.
yes. I'm aware of the time. I'm wondering if you could, this might be too big of a call. I want you to talk a little bit about your book and I'm also, your new book, but I'm also wondering if you could share one or two ways that parents maybe could simplify today or in the
Mm-hmm.
next couple of weeks or months.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that our Simplicity Parenting coaches bring to the groups all around the world is something they call small, doable change.
Yeah,
It's really small and doable. So if you look at your family week and say, it's almost like mapping it out. Was that day calming or was that day stimulating? And almost one mother did this on the calendar. She would put a C or an S. If that was a calming day, we can have a busier day tomorrow. But if that was a really stimulating day and a ton of stuff was happening, then tomorrow we're going to have a day that is calmer. And look at your calendar and just plot it out to say, you know what, we need to have a balanced week. Then by the time the weekend comes, you can actually enjoy it. You can, and the same applies to, of course, Saturdays and Sundays. Some parents find that dialing back on toys and books and just getting to the essential, that was really like just having a clean out of the clutter. That's been very popular.
yeah,
Other parents have found they need to really increase rhythm in their house and predictability and clarify that. The third thing we've noticed is that a lot of parents feel that things changed for them for the better when they questioned the overscheduling and just said, our kids need at least 3 to 4 afternoons a week in the 7-day week at home. They need to be at home, just chilling, being bored. I'm a big fan of boredom. If my kids say, Dad, there's nothing to do, and the little one says, yeah, and my response to that is, oh dear. That's it. That's it.
right.
That's the response.
Yeah.
Oh dear, because out of boredom comes creativity, and creativity that goes on and on for hours. It's beautiful. The fourth and last thing that people have noticed, Amy, is that when you dial back and filter out the adult world, just be really careful of adult conversations around kids. I always ask myself before I say anything in front of my kids, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And will it make them feel secure? True, kind, necessary, secure. And also, probably the big one where the biggest shifts have happened, to be honest with you, is one of the hardest, and that's dialing back screen time.
Yeah.
Really being careful with screen time. You asked about my next book. It's actually a bit of a shift of gear for my books. I've written 6 books now, and this is a bit of a shift of gear. This book is called Being at Your Best When Your Kids Are at Their Worst. And it's a book about emotional self-regulation for parents. So it's not a book about kids,
Yeah.
it's a book about us and how we can be better regulated when our kids are really losing it and melting down. So it's a book that focuses right on that, and that'll be we'll be running some courses on that at simplicityparenting.com, but the book will be out in early 2019.
Okay. Awesome. If you're listening to this, I will send out a recording with links to John Payne's books, his parent trainings, and all that stuff. Um, Kim, I know that you need to go, but thank you so much for being here today. You've shared so many things, and I'm going to try to summarize it. And I will be putting this video up on YouTube as well. So,
Thanks, Annette. Oh, yep, thanks. I better get back into writing the last chapter of this book,
yes,
hey?
yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Kim.
Okay, bye bye for now. Thanks for
Bye.
tuning in, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.